Michelle Marie McGrath. Welcome to Unclassified Woman, and today I'm thrilled to be talking to Meghan Daum. Meghan has been an op-ed columnist for the Los Angeles Times since 2005 and is the author of 4 books, most recently The Unspeakable and Other Subjects of Discussion, which won the 2015 Penn Center USA Award for Creative Nonfiction. She's also the editor of the New York Times best-selling anthology Selfish, Shallow and Selfabsorbed, 16 Writers on the Decision Not to Have Kids. Deemed hugely significant by The Atlantic, Selfish, Shallow and Self-Absorbed has attracted enormous media and public interest and sparked a national conversation amongst parents and non-parents alike. Meghan's basic message that opting out of parenthood is not a function of laziness or immaturity, but rather a complicated, intensely personal decision that actually honors good parenting is explored in essays from celebrated writers like Lionel Shriver, Jeff Dyer, Pam Houston, Sigrid Nunes, and Kate Christiansen, among others. And I was so excited to have the opportunity to talk about this with Meghan after I read the book earlier this year and was just like, yes, this is so great to have all of these perspectives from all of these different people, which really shatters all of these stereotypes that we're subjected to. So I really hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. Enjoy. So great to have you here today.
Great to be with you.
Really looking forward to our discussion. And so just to provide us with some context, Meghan, would you mind sharing a bit about your background and whether you've not had a child due to personal choice or through circumstances?
I have definitely not had a child due to personal choice. It's something that I think I always knew deep down I didn't want to do. And, like a lot of girls growing up, I sort of assumed that I would. You don't really think of it as an option. You just sort of think of it as something you do. And I guess as I got older and older, the biological clock never went off. I just thought, well, if I'm like everybody else, there's going to come a time when I'm going to be obsessed with doing this and want this more than anything in the world. And it just never really happened. At the same time, I'm a writer. I'm a journalist. I've always been really interested in sort of issues around identity and the intersection between identity and culture and society. And as a subject, I just found it really interesting, and it really lent itself to sort of, inquiry through a deeper lens and also a personal lens. So I've written about it a bit, and then most recently I have edited an anthology of essays by writers talking about how they came to the decision not to have kids.
Yeah, and that is a great book. I really enjoyed that, Selfish, Shallow and Self-Absorbed. And obviously you were exploring all of those different people's choices and what their circumstances were and perspectives. It's fascinating. And the thing that really struck me reading that is often, again, there are those assumptions that people are shallow and they're being selfish if they don't want to do that. And yet the people that had very consciously chosen not to me, they've given it a lot more thought often than people who've just gone ahead and assumed they are having children, not questioned it, just assumed that's what they would do and that is what they do, without always necessarily questioning their motivation for having a child. And yet we really question when somebody doesn't want that.
Yeah, I can tell you that everyone in this book has thought a lot harder about not having a child than many people think about having a child. And that's not just because I commissioned them to write, 3,000 to 5,000 word essays about it. I think that, on the whole, people who make this choice, obviously when you take a deliberate act, when you make a choice, there is some thought around it as opposed to just doing something without really making a choice or not having a choice. I also think it's really important when we have this conversation to recognize that we're really lucky to even be having this conversation. 50 years ago, this was not really a choice at all for all kinds of reasons. So I always want to be careful about that. And obviously, this is something that is a privilege in a lot of ways. And there are a lot of cultures in the world where it's still not a choice at all. But that said, I really I wanted people to talk about this in a way that I hadn't heard enough of, which was a thoughtful way that was respectful to parents while also articulating the reasons that they themselves did not want to have kids. Too often, the rhetoric around this conversation has been sort of mired in these kind of glib retorts like, I'd rather take exotic vacations than have kids, or
Yeah.
my child has 4 legs and drinks out of a bowl on the floor, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that to me does a disservice to the importance of this choice and the legitimacy of those who make it.
Yeah. And so, did you never ever personally, for a moment, question your decision? Did you ever feel any pressure from your own family or friends to reconsider or revisit that and think, oh, maybe?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I had had a lot of relationships with men where I was pressured into considering it. I mean, even in my own marriage, it was a source of great pain at times. And I mean, I have written about this. This is not a secret. When I was 41, I had I was relatively recently married and had gone through a bunch of stuff, the death of my mother, and then I had a serious, really kind of freakish, grave illness, and almost died. That's a whole other story. But anyway, we can laugh about it now. But
Yeah, but not at the time.
I can't. Right off the heels of that, I just my ambivalence around the issue was just intolerable. So I sort of said, okay, well, you know what? I'm just going to let the fates decide. I can't deal with this anymore. And I did get pregnant, and I was 41, and I had a miscarriage about 8 weeks later. Pretty standard, nothing too dramatic. And quite honestly, I was so relieved, and that really kind of sealed the deal, And that's not to say that if things had gone a different way, I wouldn't have risen to the occasion and loved that child, of course. But I don't think I would have loved my life. And that distinction is something that I make a lot in my life, and I even hear a lot of parents say, "I love my children, but I don't always love my life." And obviously, none of us are totally in love with our lives at all times, but I feel very, very certain that I am better off not being a parent. It's just sort of not what I'm here to do. I've got a lot of other things I want to do.
Yeah, and that's the distinction, isn't it? Making the choices that feel, like the right decision at any given time, and we can change our mind in a second about things. You might have felt completely one way for years, and then something can happen and trigger a different awareness. And I think that's okay as well. Often people feel that I've always said that I either A, do want a child or don't want a child, and now I need to stick to that decision, and it's like, well, not necessarily. We change our mind all the time about things. So, but it's just being true to what feels right for us at that time.
It's intellectually dishonest for people who've chosen not to have kids to say, like, I love every second of the day without having kids. I rejoice in this constantly. Nobody ever feels one way about anything. It's possible to have some grief around not having kids, even when you've made that choice deliberately and it's the best choice for you. It's possible to feel several ways at once, and I think that our culture is particularly resistant to that idea. We're sort of, we're very polarized. You're either on this side or you're on that side. You're on this team or that team. And it's so much more nuanced and complicated than all that.
Yeah, there are lots of shades of grey, let's face it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so it's been really interesting in terms of the book to hear people's different stories. There are 16 writers there are 13 women and 3 men. It was really important for me to include men in the book because they've almost been totally absent from this discussion culturally. And I think 3 to 13 is a pretty good ratio, given the degree to which men fret over this versus women. So I was pleased with that. But to your point, as you were just saying, I think that we go through life and we often assume things about ourselves that end up not being true. One of the writers, Rosemary Mahoney, talks about being a single woman in her early 40s and, having a really interesting career as a journalist and, foreign correspondent and traveling all over, and was not even in a relationship, and then just decided that she needed to have a baby. Like, she was so afraid of regretting not doing it down the road, that she pursued IVF. She paid her money. She went to the clinic. She, started down that road, and without even having any real desire to do so. And then one day she just sort of slammed on the brakes and said, "What am I doing? Like, I'm going to this huge trouble to get something I don't even want because I fear regretting it later." And you just can't make decisions based on fear of future regret. It's not. I think we can only sort of go with how we feel right now.
Yeah. And there has been research done on that topic. I think it was one of the Scandinavian countries where they did a lot of research about people later on and had they regretted it. And I think 3/4 of people actually said no, they didn't. And there's actually somebody here in Australia doing a very similar research project at the moment. And I read something the other day, and it was the percentage was around about the same again. So again, the majority of people saying no, they don't regret it at all. It was the right thing for them. But I think that's more to do with the fact, A, are you fulfilled? Are you doing something that you find meaning in? And look, maybe if you're not satisfied in your life and you're not feeling content part of the time, then maybe you might look back and see things through a different lens and think, okay, well, I'm not feeling very fulfilled. Maybe a child would have been that for me. But we can't ever really know. It's all so hypothetical, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you can't know. And, one criticism or observation I've heard from time to time about the book is, well, these are writers. Of course, they don't want to have children because, writers are, creative people are selfish, shallow, and self-absorbed. Or, more seriously, you're creating something. It is your vocation to be generative and produce work and material. So maybe this urge to reproduce yourself is not as great. And to that I say, the fact is that most writers do have children. Most writers, creative people, artists want children and have them. Most people want to have children. And I have no interest in convincing people not to have a child if that's what they want to do. What I want to do is just change the way we talk about this, because it's just so counterproductive to turn this into sort of, a war between parents and non-parents. And it's really a conversation about how you want to be in the world and what it means to be an adult and how you kind of, find your place in your community. And those are questions that we all ask ourselves, no matter whether we have kids or not, or, anything.
Absolutely. And when you were exploring all of these different essays and looking at people's perspectives, did you find that there were a lot of commonalities, or were they just all completely different? Like, were there any surprises?
I think I was surprised I wasn't really surprised because I had talked, I approached the writers and they all, almost all of the pieces were written specifically for this book. So we talked ahead of time about what they were going to write. I guess I was surprised at just how many of the women, especially, really, really thought that they were supposed to want kids. It wasn't. Nobody was really strident. There were a few people who said, honestly, this never crossed my mind. Actually, they didn't even say that. When I was recruiting writers for the book, I did have a few people who said, you know what, honestly, I never wanted kids. It's never crossed my mind. I have no angst about this, and therefore I have nothing to say, and I can't write an essay for you. So most of the people who did write essays, obviously, there was some, thought process around it and some, confusion or ambivalence or grief or whatever it was. But I was surprised by the number of people who really did feel a loss, but were also able to have the loss coexist with a sense of rightness about that decision. And I think that is a difficult concept for people to grasp, that you can be sad about something, but also know 1,000% that it's the right decision. Or maybe you don't even know 1,000%. Maybe you don't even know 100% that it's the right decision. Maybe you're 80% it's the right decision, but it's still the decision that you made. And I think that, we all have to kind of listen to ourselves in ways that the culture, particularly around this issue, does not encourage very often.
It's like any huge decision in our life, isn't it? Whether it's the right place to live, whether a relationship is really right for us, whether a certain career path or vocation is the right thing. I mean, all of these are big questions. And the one around having a child is, well, that's really a lifelong commitment. So of course, it's very possible and human to have all of these different feelings coexisting at the same time. I mean, that's such a human thing, but like you say, that is not really encouraged, and it's not how we're conditioned.
No, and I think it's hard. I think that, parents who get upset when their friends say, I don't want to have kids, I think that comes from a place of wanting to have commonality with people. I mean, yes, it's irritating when, mommies give you a hard time, or your friends, don't want to be your friend anymore, or whatever it is. I mean, but, the fact is, I think that it's human nature to want to give advice based on what we ourselves do, right? So, I mean, if it's like, if you buy a house, you want your friend to buy a house. If you, take this particular route to work, you're going to encourage your friend to do the same thing. I think that is just a very, sort of primal human social instinct. And I also think that, the parents who get really mad and resentful at people who choose not to have kids tend to be the ones, perhaps, who didn't go into it so sure of it themselves. And, if you're having a hard time and you're overwhelmed and you're, having moments where you doubt, you wonder if you made the right decision, which, let's face it, I'd say for most parents of small children, those feelings are very common.
Yeah, and natural.
It doesn't mean that they regret it. It doesn't mean they don't love their kids, all that stuff. But I think that, when you're having a day like that, or having a week or, time where you feel that way, to have someone come up and just say sort of cavalierly, well, I'm not going to have kids. And guess what? You didn't have to do that. That was actually an elective. It wasn't a requirement. I think that can be offensive to parents. And this brings me back to my real sort of goal here, or one of them, which is to change the tone of this conversation. Stop making this about who's more selfish. Stop making it about who's taking up more space on the sidewalk. And let's talk about, how to be in communities where people are playing the roles that they want to play. And actually how important it is for children to grow up in communities where there are adults around them that are not necessarily someone's mom or dad, that there are models of responsible, compassionate adults that aren't someone's parents,
Yeah, whether it's their aunties, uncles, their godparents, or even just friends of the family or neighbours even, depending on where you live. And so one of the comments that you made that I really, really resonated with so much was, we need to stop mistaking self-knowledge for self-absorption. And I just thought, yes, it's so true. There seems to be this tendency to really judge people, often when they're just really clear. There seems to be this thing where it's skewed, meaning, oh, they're just really self-absorbed. Like,
Right.
I think that's a very common trait that we observe that.
Yeah, I know, it's interesting, and it's not just over things like this. I think I don't know, I've noticed a few times if I feel very sort of certain about something, that can kind of be perceived as being rigid or not wanting to do anything else. But yeah, I mean, again, I think that, having a child is one of these things that a lot of people talk themselves into. They get talked into it, or more likely they talk themselves into it. And one of my contributors, Jeannie Safer, who I think she's the oldest contributor in the book, she's 68 now, and she writes such an important essay because she talks about having gone through this decision making process 25 years earlier, and a lot of agony she had around it, and coming out the other side, and being 68 now and having no regrets, and realizing that the moment of truth for her was when she was able to articulate to herself that she didn't want a baby, but she wanted to want a baby.
Yeah.
And I read that, and it just really hit me like a ton of bricks. That was pretty much the place I got to. It was that I didn't want to do this, but I wished I wanted to do it for the sake of my husband, for the sake of my in-laws, for all kinds of reasons. And at the end of the day, those were just not good enough reasons.
Yeah. And we're all here to create in different ways and express our creative energy. And obviously having a child is only one of those ways. So you are expressing that through your writing and your work. And so what other way would you feel that you express your creative energy?
Well, I mean, I'm very fortunate that I get to do the work that I do, and I get to have opinions, and I'm very lucky that way. And I would love actually somebody to put together a book or a project of sort of non-creative people who've just had kids talking about how they came to the decision. I mean, ultimately I chose writers for this book because writers write, and, they're the ones who distill experiences into more universal expression. So that's what this project was. But yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to suggest that the only people who are, quote unquote, allowed to make this decision or whatever it is, are people who have some other outlet. I think you could be, you could do any sort of job. You could do no job. You could lay on your couch all day. And if you don't want to have a child, my gosh, you should not have one, So I just think that, again, it really comes down to knowing yourself and giving yourself permission to know yourself. I mean, especially here in the US, we're so into this idea of change and redemption and being a better person. And I mean, I think part of the reason I kind of waffled, when I was 41 is because I had this severe illness and I got better, and there was this expectation around me to sort of get my priorities straight, or, change, not be the, selfish, shallow, self-absorbed person I had been, up until then. And it was kind of a revelation when I realized, well, no, actually I am the same. Surviving this illness, the ultimate survival would be to stay the same person. Right. So, and that person is somebody who's just never been interested in this. And that's not to say, again, that if I did have a child, who knows, maybe I would be completely surprised and I would love my life and I would love everything about it. But I kind of doubt it. And I'm just not willing to take that risk.
Yeah. And I think one of the problems is we are just faced with the weight of all of these stereotypes and the mythical figure of the Madonna, and this, I think often, it's sort of, motherhood is sold to us in these rose-tinted glasses. And of course, it's not that easy or straightforward at all. It would be one of the most challenging, confronting, and hard journeys that a woman could ever embark
Absolutely.
upon. So I think it's given this whole sort of sales pitch really in our society about how it's, it's the only pure love you'll ever really experience, and all of these types of things that we're so used to. So it's no wonder that unconsciously people just think, well, it's what I'm meant to do. What else could possibly be half as meaningful?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's commodified in the culture, and and there are reasons for that. I mean, being a parent, doing it correctly is really, really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And this goes back to why I think it's so important to change the way we talk about this, because, when childless by choice people, or child free, as some people like to use that word, when we go around saying things like, hey, look I'm so free, I can, jet off to wherever I want, whenever I want, and I have all this disposable income, and, good for me, that is offensive to parents. And that's just, and also it's not true, because I don't know anybody who can jet off whenever they want to, solely because they don't have kids. That's absurd. But for some reason, there's such a taboo against just saying, I just don't want to do this, that it has become more socially acceptable to make a joke about how shallow you are. And the fact is that we're making this decision because we respect how difficult parents. I think that choosing not to have children is a form of paying tribute to parents.
Yeah.
And that piece, that's not a connection that the culture has been able to make so far.
It really hasn't. That's so right. And also this implication that, you're just jetting off around the world, and that obviously if you don't have a child, clearly you have no responsibilities or worries or concerns whatsoever.
Right.
Which is just not true. And I know so many people who don't have children, and yet they are supporting children in other ways, whether it's, through philanthropic gestures. They might be sponsoring the education of a number of other children, or they might, all of this. So I think often we don't see enough of those examples either. And that's some of the things that I've been trying to highlight through this podcast, and looking at different women around the world who are creating lives of meaning and purpose in another form. And it doesn't mean that children aren't a part of life. Often they've got a lot of children in their life in different relationships.
Yeah. And I mean, statistically, people who don't have kids do more volunteer work. I mean, doesn't take a genius to figure out why. I mean, we have more time often, and it's that makes sense. I mean, if someone's got, 3 kids under 4, I don't, expect them to go down to the animal shelter every day. But, there are just so many ways that one can participate in one's community. And again, I think, I think back on the, growing up, the people I knew, whether they were teachers or whoever, who didn't have kids and, were living in ways that were different from most of the people I knew. And in my suburban town, where there was literally nobody over 40 who, nobody, there was nobody under 40 there. There was no adult there who didn't have kids. It was not a place for anything but raising kids. And that's just not a very broadening vision to grow up with, I think. And it's so important for kids to know that there are lots of ways to be in the world.
Yeah, and lots of other positive role models. And so, Meghan, what do you personally feel are the major benefits, if that's the right word, of not having had your own children now? What do you feel?
I'm going to jet off to a foreign country as soon as we finish.
Off to the airport, quick, smart.
The benefit, well, I mean, I guess the main benefit is that I just feel so lucky that I have even the ability to make this choice, that I live in a time and place where that is an option. And I really just, I feel that I know myself. And I mean, sometimes it's a small thing of thinking, oh gosh, I'm so glad I don't have to stop working right now and go pick somebody up at school. And sometimes it's a big thing. Like, wow, I'm living a life that feels authentic to me. I mean, I guess that's the main thing, is I don't feel like I'm living the wrong life. I feel like I'm doing pretty much what I'm here to do. And that is such a lucky way to feel. And it's rare. And I think, that's a great privilege. And choosing not to have kids is a part of that. It's not all of it, but it's part of it.
Absolutely. Oh, well, thank you so much, Meghan, for your time. And so where's the best place to find you online for anyone that's listening would like to explore more of your work?
Oh, well, you can Google me and see what you come up with. The little frightening. So my website is meghandaum.com. So that's spelled MEGHANDAUM.com. And I'm pretty much all over the place. Better.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great speaking to you and hearing your insights.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Unclassified Woman. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. For information on events and services, connect with Michelle at michellemariemcgrath.com.